So you finally showed your true colors, huh? I knew someone like you couldn't resist easy money. Oded in disdain and certainty, Dorothy Martinez froze. She stood at the end of the east hallway, dusting the oak paneling beneath a framed painting of the Rocky Mountains. Her gaze slowly shifted to the open vault door down the corridor, heavy stainless steel and unmistakably ajar. It hadn't been that way moments ago. And now Mr. Michael Harrison, billionaire, aerospace magnate, and master of suspicion, had accused her outright of theft. Her hands trembled not from guilt, but from the sheer audacity of the accusation. She hadn't touched a dollar, hadn't stepped foot inside that room, but the way he said it, so final, so venomous, sliced through her like a cold wind. In the mansion's underground surveillance room, Michael leaned forward in his worn leather chair, one hand still hovering over the intercom mic. On the monitor before him, Ma stood stock still in the hallway, the vault visible in the background. A red folder sat on the desk inside, and one bundle of $100 bills purposefully left unguarded was now missing. To him, it was obvious. "What did I expect?" he muttered bitterly. "Hire someone from nowhere, and this is what you get. Take the uniform off and they're just another hustler." He wanted to press the button again, to drill her with more accusations. But something in her stillness made him hesitate. She didn't look caught. She looked insulted. Dorothy slowly laid the dusting cloth down on the table beside her. Her voice when she spoke was calm and clear. "Mr. Harrison, I haven't taken anything. I haven't even walked into the room. Don't lie to me," he snapped through the mic. "I've got eyes on every inch of this house. That money's gone, and you're the only one near the vault." I walked past the door. It was open. I was about to report it. He clicked off the mic. No use arguing. She'd shown her hand. Except had she? He scrubbed backward through the video feed. There she was walking calmly down the hall, pausing as she noticed the vault open, frowning slightly. Her feet stopped at the carpet's edge, never crossing the doorway. Her eyes darted to the inside, then away. She reached into her pocket not for cash, but for her phone and sent a message. He zoomed in. The screen showed her typing. "Vault room door open. Please confirm. To the estate manager." Michael leaned back, staring at the screen unsettled. No theft, no hesitation, just a report, just a woman doing her job. But still the money was missing. Had she taken it earlier, hidden it somewhere? Had she outsmarted even his cameras? He refused to doubt his gut. Too many years, too many betrayals. Back in the hallway, Dorothy stood motionless, her heart pounding. Not from fear, but frustration. The kind that builds from being underestimated, misjudged, labeled. Again, this wasn't the first time people like her, black, quiet, poor, weren't given the benefit of the doubt. Not in jobs like this. Not in houses like this. And certainly not by men like Michael Harrison. She'd worked too hard to earn dignity. Too long to carry the burden of others' assumptions. She would not defend herself further. Not now. She turned back straight and walked away. In the surveillance room, Michael watched her disappear from the frame. No panic, no guilt, just silence. His hand lingered over the mouse. He rewound the footage again. There was something unsettling about her restraint. If she were guilty, where was the urgency, the nervous glance, the rush to hide? He didn't like that he was starting to question his certainty. Downstairs in the laundry room, Dorothy sat on the bench, phone in hand. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of being caught, but from exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. A new message buzzed on her screen. "Mom, baby, we just got the final notice. They'll shut down the store Friday if we don't pay. I hate to ask, but do you have anything saved?" She stared at the message. Jessica Groceries. The little shop her grandparents had opened in New Orleans after the war had weathered hurricanes and riots, but it might not survive the loan sharks now. $42,000. She could have it in minutes if she were the person Mr. Harrison thought she was, but she wasn't. She locked her phone, stood and returned to her duties. If there was one thing Dorothy Martinez had learned in life, it was this. Her integrity was the only thing no one could ever accuse her of stealing, because no one could take it. Not even a bitter old man watching her through a dozen cameras. Not even a billionaire who mistook suspicion for truth. GPTO. Chapter 1. The Accusation. "So this is who you really are. I knew you'd crack eventually, just like the rest of them. The words dropped like stones from the mansion's intercom, hard and full of contempt. But they weren't just words this time. They came with footsteps. Heavy, fast. Angry Dorothy Martinez stood frozen in front of the open vault room door, her hand still hovering near the handle. She hadn't gone inside. She hadn't touched a thing. The door had been slightly ajar when she passed by during her routine cleaning, and the faint metallic scent of the vault had caught her attention. That and the unusual sight of cash bundles half exposed on the central table. Then the voice came, and now so did Hay. Michael Harrison stormed up the grand staircase like a man possessed. At 67, he moved with the force of someone half his age when he was angry, and right now he was livid. "You think I wouldn't notice," he barked as he rounded the corner. Dorothy stepped back instinctively. "Mr. Harrison, I was." But before she could finish, his hand shot out, rough cold. He grabbed her wrist and yanked her away from the doorway with more strength than she thought he had. She stumbled, heels scraping on the hardwood, and fell backward onto the polished floor with a dull thud. Pain flared across her elbow and hip as she hit the ground, her breath caught in her chest. Michael didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the room, then the table inside the vault. One bundle's missing. "I count my cash every Monday. You walked right into the trap." Dorothy struggled to sit up, cradling her arm. "Sir, I never stepped into the vault. The door was open when I passed. I was about to call security. Please check the cameras. I didn't take anything." "Don't insult me," he said flatly. "You people always have a story." You people?" Ma's voice cracked, not with guilt but disbelief. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "I've done nothing wrong." Michael turned his back on her. The hallway felt colder than it had a moment ago. He didn't even offer a hand to help her up. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He just walked away, his footsteps retreating down the hall like a closing door. Dorothy sat in silence for a moment, not crying, not even angry, just stunned. As if a lifetime of staying silent, working hard, keeping her head down, all of it had still led her here. Accused, bruised, dismissed. She finally pushed herself up, straightened her uniform, and walked carefully toward the staff stairwell. She could feel the sting in her wrist where he gripped her. She could feel the echo of judgment in every step. Back in his control room, Michael replayed the footage for the fourth time. There she was, walking past the vault, pausing, tilting her head toward the door, then turning slowly, clearly, never stepping over the line. He paused, the frame zoomed in. Her expression wasn't greed. It wasn't fear. It was confusion. Maybe even concern. His brow furrowed. He rewound again. The cash was indeed missing, but not in the way he thought. The timestamp from earlier that morning showed the bundle had been removed by his estate accountant for deposit prep. Michael had forgotten. The mistake slammed into him like a gust of Montana wind. He sat back, fingers curled into fists. He had grabbed her, shoved her, accused her to her face, and now the camera proved her innocence. And still he didn't move, didn't call her, didn't apologize. Old habits die hard, and guilt, even earned guilt, wasn't something Michael Harrison knew how to sit with. In the staff quarters, Dorothy rinsed the shallow scrape on her arm under cool water, her jaw tight. She didn't curse, didn't scream, but deep down something shifted. She had worked in 5 different houses before this one. Always professional, always unnoticed, but never manhandled, never spoken to like that, and certainly never told she was just like the rest. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, calm, strong, wounded. Then she picked up her phone, text to Mom. "Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. I'm just tired tonight." She wouldn't tell her mother. Not yet. But something inside her had been bruised that day, worse than her skin. Her dignity had been tested, her humanity denied, and something told her this wouldn't be the last test. Dorothy's wrist throbbed as she pushed open the heavy kitchen door the next morning. She had wrapped it in a soft bandage before bed, but the dull ache remained a reminder of the previous day's humiliation. The mansion was quiet, eerily so. The kind of silence that seeped into the walls, thick and still, like the air after a storm that didn't quite wash everything clean. She moved through her routine without hesitation, set the water to boil, laid out the linen for breakfast, checked the pantry inventory. Her body knew the motions. Her mind, however, wandered. He hadn't said a word since yesterday. Not a message, not a demand, not even a dismissal. Most men in his position would have fired her outright or at least made a show of it. Michael Harrison hadn't done either, and somehow that made the silence worse. She poured black coffee into the bone-white china cup and carried it upstairs the way she had every morning for the past 3 weeks. When she reached the door to his study, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered near the polished brass handle. Yesterday, that same hand had been wrenched by the man she was now serving coffee to. But she knocked anyway. A pause. Then from inside, "Come in." She entered, careful to keep her gaze professional, unreadable. Michael was at his desk, peering over a manila folder, eyes narrowed behind silver-rimmed glasses. His posture was straight, stiff, as if held together by something more rigid than bone. Pride, maybe. She placed the coffee on the coaster in front of him. "Your usual, sir." He didn't look up. She waited for a beat, then turned to go. "Dorothy," he said abruptly, stopping her in her tracks. "Do you know what happens when people think they can get away with things?" She turned back slowly, unsure if he was asking a question or making another accusation. "They do it again," he said, finally lifting his eyes to meet hers. She blinked once. "I didn't do anything, Mr. Harrison." His gaze lingered on her bandaged wrist. "You were near the vault. So were your accountant and your assistant. The cameras show that." "I didn't step inside. Doesn't mean you didn't intend to." "I intended to report it." He didn't reply. She could feel the weight of his doubt, the way it clung to the air like smoke that refused to clear. The moment stretched. Then with a curtain nod, he returned to his paperwork. Dismissed again, Dorothy walked out of the study, with her spine straight, chin lifted, but her stomach twisted. Not because of guilt, but because of the rot that lived beneath this house's grand exterior. It wasn't just Michael's suspicion. It was his certainty that suspicion was always justified. Downstairs, she returned to the laundry room. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. "Mom's store hanging by a thread, baby. Talk to the loan office again. They're pushing for collateral. Don't know what to do." Dorothy sat on the edge of the folding table, reading the message over and over. She had $3,000 in her savings. That wasn't enough, not even close. And upstairs sat a vault wide open yesterday, filled with more cash than her family would see in 5 lifetimes. Her jaw tightened. She wouldn't steal. She never would. But that didn't stop the feeling of injustice from clawing at her chest. It wasn't just that Michael accused her. It was that he expected it. That he was so sure someone like her couldn't be trusted, that being honest wasn't enough if her skin, her silence, or her background didn't look the way he thought trustworthiness should. Later that afternoon, as Dorothy scrubbed the tile floor in the West Wing, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't look up. "You know," came a woman's voice, sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Worthington has fired people for less." Dorothy glanced up to see Elise, the house manager, blonde, sleek, and always carrying herself like she owned a piece of the estate. "I didn't do anything," Dorothy replied, going back to her work. "Maybe not," Elise said with a shrug. "But he doesn't need proof, just a hunch. And between you and me, he doesn't keep people around once he stops trusting them." Dorothy didn't reply. She didn't need to. She knew the message behind Elisa's warning wasn't about performance. It was about position, about power. As the sun began to set, Dorothy took her break on the back porch. The Montana sky had turned into a watercolor of deep orange and pale lavender. In the distance, horses grazed near the property fence. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo, her younger brother Tyler from 4 years ago, standing behind the register at the family store with their mom beaming. That store had survived 2 hurricanes, a fire, and a pandemic. It wouldn't survive this long. A breeze picked up, lifting the corner of the photo slightly. She pressed it flat again, her mind circling the same thought. What do you do when you're accused of a crime you didn't commit? Worse, what do you do when the world believes you probably did just because it always has? What do you truly think of Dorothy? If you believe in her, give her a like to help lift her spirit. And don't forget to share where you're listening to this story from. Who knows, someone near you might be listening too. You hold your head high, you keep showing up. You don't give them what they expect. That night, she changed the bandage on her wrist and wrote in her journal something she hadn't done in months. Just one line. "My dignity is not for sale, not even for justice." And somewhere upstairs in his study, Michael Harrison poured himself a drink, his third that evening, and stared at the paused footage of the day before, of Dorothy still outside the vault of his own hand on her wrist. He hadn't apologized. He wasn't sure he knew how. The next morning brought a shift in the air. Dorothy noticed it the moment she stepped into the main hall. The house felt watched not just by cameras. Those were a constant, but by people by intent. Something had changed behind the scenes. And though nothing was said outright, Dorothy could sense it in the way Elisa's heels clicked more sharply on the marble, in the way the gardener Jerome gave her a long glance through the kitchen window and quickly looked away. She went about her duties anyway, quiet, composed, unshaken. By 10 she was called to the office. "Mr. Worthington wants to see you," Elise said with that practiced smile that held no warmth. Dorothy nodded, wiped her hands on her apron, and headed upstairs. As she approached the study, she adjusted her wrist bandage beneath her sleeve. The pain had dulled to a background ache, but the memory of his grip hadn't. She knocked. "Enter." Michael stood at the far end of the study, arms crossed, looking out the window that faced the stables. The morning sun cut clean lines across the wooden floor, catching the dust in the air. On the desk between them sat a folder closed with a fountain pen laid perfectly parallel on top. "You wanted to see me, sir?" He didn't turn around right away. When he did, his face was unreadable. "How long have you been here now?" 23 days. "And in that time you've cleaned, cooked, watched, listened." Dorothy's brow furrowed slightly. "I've done my job." "Yes," he said, eyes narrowing. "So why does it feel like you're hiding something?" She took a breath, steadying herself. "I don't know, Mr. Worthington. Maybe it's because you're used to being lied to." He blinked. That wasn't the answer he expected. He paced slowly around the desk, voice lower now. "I had the money counted again. Turns out the missing bundle wasn't missing at all. Misfiled, human error." She said nothing. He walked to the desk and opened the folder. "This is a non-disclosure agreement, standard policy. You'll sign it today." Her eyes scanned the document, briefly noting the clauses confidentiality, loyalty, personal conduct. But the last page had something odd, a paragraph titled Integrity Assurance Clause. It gave Michael the right to monitor all private communications while on his property, including phone messages and emails. The penalty for breach: immediate termination, and a formal report to local authorities for suspicion of misconduct. Dorothy looked up. "You want me to sign this because you still think I'm hiding something? I want to protect my interests?" He said evenly. "You still have a job. That should count for something, does it?" He tilted his head. "You want to walk away from this opportunity, be my guest." She stared at him for a long moment, then took the pen, signed her name at the bottom of the page, and placed it neatly on the desk. "I have nothing to hide," she said. Michael watched her. There was something unsettling about her confidence. Not arrogance, something quieter, more deeply rooted, like a tree that refused to bend in a storm. She turned to leave. Wet, she paused. He hesitated, then gestured to the chair. "Sit." Dorothy raised an eyebrow but complied. "I've seen your record," Michael began. "Graduated top 10 in your class, majored in literature, volunteered at a senior center for 2 years. No arrests, no debt. So why are you cleaning houses for a living?" She met his gaze. "Because a degree doesn't erase reality. I take care of my family. My mother's store is failing. My brother's in and out of the hospital. And jobs with benefits don't come easily when you're a black woman who doesn't smile on command." Michael studied her, the silent stretching. "You could have taken that money," he said quietly. "No one would have stopped you." "But I didn't," she replied. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." The admission hung in the air like smoke. He looked away first. "You may go," he said. She stood, walked out, and didn't look back. That night, Michael sat in his darkened study, the glow from the fireplace casting long shadows across the walls. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and sat in silence, staring at the flickering flame. In front of him, the security footage played again, not of Dorothy near the vault, but of what she did afterward. She'd gone straight to her quarters, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled out an old photo, held it to her chest, then wiped her eyes. Michael watched it again and again. Note, guilt, note, fear, grief. In her room, Dorothy added a note to her journal. "Some people think power means never apologizing, but I know better. Power is knowing you were wrong and choosing not to double down." She folded her apron for the night, smoothed it flat, and placed it on the dresser. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would meet it standing. Because dignity wasn't something you earned from men like Michael Worthington. It was something you brought with you and kept even when no one believed you deserved it. The rain came hard that night, drumming against the high windows like the tapping of persistent fingers. Dorothy stood in the laundry room folding towels, the warm scent of fresh linen doing little to ease the chill she felt deep in her bones. The storm outside seemed to echo the one that had been stirring quietly inside her all week. A storm of unease, of pressure, of something bigger than the simple act of surviving. She was still employed. Technically, she had signed the agreement. She had been neither thanked nor forgiven. And while Michael Harrison hadn't raised his voice at her again, or laid a hand on her, he hadn't offered an apology either. Instead, he had chosen to scrutinize her more quietly with longer stares, with more detailed tasks, and with surprise inspections. Yet something else had shifted. That morning, for the first time since her arrival, Michael hadn't called her Miss Jessica with that tight, reluctant formality. He'd simply said Dorothy, as if the name itself no longer carried suspicion. Still, trust was nowhere in the air. As Mia stacked the folded towels, she heard the back door creak open and Boots step inside, leaving puddles on the stone floor. Jerome the gardener appeared in the doorway. His soaked jacket clung to his frame, and his face was drawn eyes cautious. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Dorothy gave a small nod. "Just tired." "I heard what happened," he said, stepping inside, lowering his voice. "Elise talks too much when she thinks no one's listening. He thought you stole from the vault." "He still might," Dorothy said simply. Jerome glanced over his shoulder, then stepped closer. "Listen, I probably shouldn't say this, but there's something off. Something's going on behind the scenes. Elise has been sneaking out late at night, and the estate accountant he's been driving back and forth from town every other day, way more than usual." Dorothy frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you weren't the only one being tested," Jerome muttered. "Maybe you're the only one who passed." Before she could respond, he nodded once and slipped back through the hallway, leaving muddy footprints in his wake. That night, Dorothy lay awake longer than usual, staring at the wooden beams above her bed. Her mind replayed Jerome's words over and over. Maybe you weren't the only one being tested. The next morning, she was assigned an unusual task delivering sealed documents to Worthington's private attorney in town. Elise handed her the envelope with a fake smile and a tight, "Don't be late." Dorothy hesitated. "I thought you usually handle these." "Elise is busy managing the estate," Elise replied sharply. "Besides, Mr. Harrison thought it'd be good for you to prove yourself." Dorothy said nothing and took the envelope. The drive to town was quiet. She kept the radio off, her mind alert. The envelope was unmarked, heavy, and sealed with a wax crest she recognized from Worthington's personal study. When she arrived at the law office, the receptionist asked her to wait. A few minutes later, a man in a gray suit emerged. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were cautious. "You're Miss Jessica?" "Yes." "May I see the letter?" She handed it over. The man opened it and scanned the contents, then gave her a quick nod. "You're all set," he said. "Tell Mr. Harrison the documents will be returned signed by Friday." "Of course," she said, but her eyes lingered on the paper just long enough to catch a glimpse of something odd. The heading "Transfer of Assets," and beneath that, a name, Elise Harrow. On the drive back, Mia gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her heart thudded in her chest. It wasn't her business, technically, but the detail gnawed at her. That night, as she was cleaning the study, she noticed a printed schedule left on the desk. Michael's handwriting was scrolled in the margins, notes written in his usual sharp penmanship. Friday, accountant review. Saturday, Elise, final transition. Transition. The word lingered like smoke in her mind. Later, as she passed Jerome on the gravel path near the stable, she whispered, "You were right. Something is happening. Elise is being handed something. Possibly the estate." Jerome's face darkened. "Then she's been playing the long game." Dorothy nodded. "We have 3 days to find out how long." And for the first time since arriving at the Worthington estate, Dorothy no longer felt like just the help. She felt like a thread in a larger story, one she had been pulled into unwillingly, but one she could no longer ignore. She wasn't here to prove her innocence anymore. She was here to uncover something rotten buried beneath all this wealth, all this silence, all this power. The test wasn't over. It was just beginning. Friday arrived cloaked in gray clouds and an unsettling stillness that stretched over the Worthington estate like a warning. Dorothy dressed earlier than usual, pulling her uniform tight, her mind already racing with the events of the past few days. The transfer document she'd glimpsed the transition note scribbled in Michael's hand. Elise's smug smirks. It all painted a picture she couldn't ignore anymore. She moved through her morning duties as usual, but kept her eyes open, ears sharper. Michael had not summoned her. Elise, unusually quiet, spent most of the morning behind closed doors, making calls from the East Wing lounge off limits to staff. By noon, Dorothy found herself back in the laundry room, folding sheets with methodical precision, while her mind traced every thread of suspicion. Jerome entered, quietly shutting the door behind him. "I checked the garage last night," he whispered. Elisa's car trunk had a hidden compartment. Inside was a burner phone and a separate folder with copies of property documents. Not just this estate. 3 others Mia's heart skipped. She's not just being handed the estate. She's taking everything and covering her tracks, Jerome said. But here's the worst part. Michael doesn't know. Mia's pulse quickened. Then who's signing those documents? Jerome hesitated. His signature's on one of them, but it's not his writing. Someone's forging it. A cold sensation wrapped around Mia's spine. How soon is the transition supposed to happen? Tomorrow, Jerome confirmed. Saturday, just like the note said. Mia leaned against the counter, staring at the window. Rain had started again, soft at first, then heavier. The estate blurred behind a veil of mist. "I need to talk to him," she said. Jerome raised an eyebrow. "He trusts no one." "I'm not asking for his trust," she replied. "I'm asking for one last look at the truth." It was late afternoon when Dorothy knocked on the door to Michael's study. He was alone, seated in his leather chair, nursing his usual bourbon. He didn't look up. "Come in." She stepped inside and stood silently for a moment, watching him. He looked tired, older than usual. There were lines in his face that hadn't been there a week ago, but his eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were still sharp. "Speak." "I need 10 minutes," she said. "No assumptions, no interruptions." He said nothing, just waved his hand for her to continue. "Elise is stealing from you," Dorothy said flatly, "and not just this estate. She's transferring assets across 3 other properties using forged documents. I saw one. Her name is on the transfer. Your name is forged on the authorization. Tomorrow is the final step." Michael didn't move. "She's already moved the paperwork through your attorney. Probably using their trust in her to bypass verification," Dorothy continued. "You think I'm the thief, but you've been sleeping beside a traitor for years." He leaned back slowly. "You expect me to believe this based on a glimpse of a page number. I expect you to believe your own instincts. The ones that made you check the vault, that made you test me. You wanted to find a liar. She's right under your roof." Silence hung like a blade between them. Then Michael reached for his phone, tapped a few commands, and pulled up a camera feed. "This was recorded 3 days ago," he said. On the screen, Elise in the study, going through the locked drawer of his desk. She had a key. She pulled out files, snapped pictures, then carefully placed everything back. Dorothy watched, stunned. "You knew," she said softly. "I suspected," Michael said. "But I had no proof of intent." Until now, Dorothy straightened. "Then stop it. Call the attorney. Halt the transition." His eyes met hers, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw something flicker behind them. "Respect. You've risked your job for this," he said. "I've risked more than that," she replied. He stood. "Place the glass down. Meet me here tomorrow at 9. Bring Jerome. We'll finish this." That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. The rain had turned into wind, howling across the fields. She stared at the ceiling, thinking of her mother, of the store, of the long chain of days where she'd been silent, obedient, dismissed. Now she was none of those things. At dawn, she rose, tied her apron tighter, and prepared not for chores but for a reckoning. Saturday morning arrived with an unnatural calm, the kind that came before a storm, not of weather, but of confrontation. Dorothy dressed with steady hands, though her stomach twisted with anticipation. Today would either mark the end of her time at the Worthington estate or the beginning of something far more uncertain. At precisely 900 a.m., she stepped into the study. Jerome was already there, standing stiffly near the bookshelf, his hat in hand. Michael sat at the desk, his back to them, facing the fireplace. He didn't turn as Dorothy entered, but gestured toward a small stack of folders on the desk. Everything's here, he said. Copies of the property, deeds, the signature, samples, the footage. I've spoken to the attorney. He agreed to come here this morning instead of finalizing the paperwork. Dorothy nodded. What about Elise? She'll be here, Michael said finally, turning to face them. She thinks she's about to be named sole manager of my estates. Jerome gave a low whistle. She's bold, she's clever, Michael corrected. And until yesterday, I thought she was loyal. Dorothy held his gaze. People don't betray you overnight, Mr. Harrison. They just get better at hiding it. A faint knock interrupted the room. Elise stepped inside, polished as always, hair tied neatly, heels clicking across the hardwood. You wanted to see me, Michael. Her tone was syrupy, but Dorothy could hear the slight edge underneath. Michael stood slowly. Yes, I thought it only right to meet before finalizing the transition. Elise's smile flickered. Of course. Michael circled the desk and handed her a document. But before that, I want to confirm one last thing. She glanced at the paper, her eyes scanning quickly. This is yesterday's authorization form. Yes, the one you told my attorney I'd approved. Elise's jaw tensed, barely perceptible. You did, no, Michael said, voice hardening. I didn't, and more importantly, this isn't my signature. Silence. The room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls themselves were waiting to hear what would happen next. I don't know what you're implying, Elise said sharply. I've managed your business affairs for over a decade. If there was a clerical error, stop. Michael raised his hand. This isn't a clerical error. This is fraud. Dorothy stepped forward. I saw the documents you had hidden in your car, Elise. Jerome found them. And the burner phone. Elise's face palled slightly. You went through my vehicle. You were stealing from him, Dorothy said. You're lucky that's all we did. Michael moved to his desk and pressed a button on a small device. Instantly, audio crackled to life. Elise's voice captured on a hidden recorder from earlier in the week. Once it's signed, it's done. Worthington has no idea. By the time he blinks, he'll be sitting in one house while I control the rest. Elise staggered back a step. That's taken out of context. Jerome scoffed. It always is. You manipulated my trust, Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. You stole documents, forged my signature, and tried to transfer my estate under your name. How many years has this been in motion? Elise's eyes darted between them. You're making a mistake. She pointed at Dorothy. She's turned you against me. You think she's clean? She's been snooping from the day she arrived. Dorothy didn't flinch. I was defending myself from your boss's accusation, and now I'm defending him from yours. Elise's lips twisted. She'll turn on you too. They always do. Michael stepped forward, eyes like flint. No, Elise. The only betrayal in this house is yours, and it ends now. Outside, tires crunched over the gravel driveway. The attorney had arrived. Within the hour, Elise was gone. The documents shredded, the transfer blocked. Michael sat in silence after the door closed behind her. Dorothy and Jerome stood nearby, unsure if the room was heavier with relief or regret. You saved me a fortune, Michael said finally without looking up. More than that, you saved me from my own blindness. Dorothy spoke softly. Sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth when no one wants to hear it. He nodded slowly. You're not like anyone I've ever worked with, he said. I know, she replied. That's why you didn't see me coming. And for the first time since Dorothy arrived at the estate, Michael Worthington smiled, not out of superiority or performance, but something real. The day after Elise's departure, the Worthington estate settled into an unusual stillness. The usual sharp rhythm of orders and appointments gave way to long, quiet hours. There was no ringing phone, no chatter over breakfast, and no echo of high heels cutting across marble. Dorothy stood at the window of the guest quarters, watching the wind ripple through the trees like a whisper through silk. The estate grounds, once feeling vast and detached, now felt almost intimate, smaller, like they had drawn in around her. She made her way through her morning tasks with a new kind of awareness. There was no accusation following her down the halls now. No need to second-guess his every glance. Yet the space that mistrust had once filled still lingered, hollow and echoing. Michael didn't call for her that morning, but just before noon, Jerome found her in the garden, where she was trimming back frost, wilted herbs. "He wants to see you," he said simply. Dorothy wiped her hands, nodded, and made her way back to the house. The study door was already open when she arrived. Michael was behind his desk again this time, not with a drink or a file, but with a small, square box. The fireplace was lit, and beside it 2 chairs faced each other, like a conversation waiting to happen. He gestured to one of them. "Have a seat." Dorothy complied, cautious but composed. "I've been thinking a lot." Michael began, his voice lower, less clipped than before. "About what you said about justice, trust, and blindness." She remained silent, waiting. "I built everything I have by expecting the worst in people," he said, "and it kept me rich, safe, in control. But not once until this week did I consider what it might have cost me." Dorothy tilted her head slightly. "And what do you think it's cost you?" He looked down at the box in his lap, opened it, then handed it to her. Inside was a single gold key, old and slightly tarnished, resting on a piece of velvet. "It's for the lockbox in the West Wing. My father gave it to me before he died. Inside are the original titles, family documents, letters in a journal." Dorothy looked up, puzzled. "I want you to read it." Michael said, "It's not just for legacy, it's for clarity about who I am and about what this place means." Dorothy hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you saw the truth without being asked. You stood up when others wouldn't. You've earned more than a job here. You've earned my trust, and that's not something I give lightly." Dorothy closed the box slowly, holding his gaze. "I don't need to read a journal to know who you are now. I've seen what you do when you're wrong. That tells me more than any letter ever could." Michael smiled faintly. "But I think you'll understand me better after reading it. And if you still think I'm worth working for afterward, I'll make the offer official, not just as house staff, but as a state director with full oversight." Dorothy's eyes widened. "That's a serious offer. I don't make casual ones." A long pause passed between them, then she nodded. "All right, I'll read it." Later that afternoon, Dorothy entered the quiet West Wing with the gold key in her hand. The lockbox was in a narrow room tucked behind a portrait of Michael's grandfather. Inside was a leather-bound journal, aged but well-kept, and a collection of neatly folded letters tied with ribbon. She began reading on the small settee near the window, the afternoon light softening the worn pages. The journal wasn't what she expected. It told the story of a boy raised by a father who taught him to never trust anyone who hadn't earned their place, a father who believed in harsh discipline and control, a man who viewed kindness as weakness. But scattered between those pages were entries that hinted at another Michael, the one who questioned, who regretted, who wondered what might happen if he let people in. Dorothy closed the book slowly, just as the sun dipped below the hills. She felt something deep in her chest, not sympathy, but understanding. Everyone had a choice about what to do with pain. Some used it to protect, others used it to punish. Michael perhaps had done both. That night over dinner, a quiet one with just the two of them, Michael broke the silence. So she met his eyes and answered simply, "I'll take the job, but I want one condition." He raised a brow. "What's that?" "I want the estate to sponsor 3 scholarships a year for young women of color pursuing literature, business, or law." Michael blinked, surprised, but after a moment nodded slowly. "Deal." They clinked glasses, hers water, his wine. In the glow of the dining room chandelier, Dorothy saw not just a house reclaiming its peace, but a man reclaiming something of his own humanity. And for the first time since her arrival, she felt not just employed, but empowered. The days that followed were unlike anything Mia had experienced since arriving at the Worthington estate. Her new role came with authority, yes, but also with visibility. Staff now looked to her not as an outsider, but as a point of direction. Vendors called her name, not Michael's. Schedules filtered through her desk, not Elisa's ghosted inbox. The shift was quiet but profound. On her first Monday as a state director, she stood in the East Corridor overseeing the installation of a new security system. Jerome stood beside her, clipboard in hand, his expression half amusement, half pride. "You look like you've been running this place for years," he said. Dorothy smiled. "Feels like I've aged 10 in just the past month." Jerome laughed. "Well, age or not, things feel different around here." Lighter. That evening, after the final check of the grounds, Dorothy returned to the study where Michael was finishing up a call. I confirmed the wire, he said, hanging up. The scholarship fund is official. First awards open next semester. Dorothy's chest lifted with quiet satisfaction. Thank you for making that happen. You made it happen, Michael replied. I'm just the checkbook. She sat opposite him. I've been thinking about the staff meetings. Right now, everything filters from the top down. We should open a feedback channel, anonymous if possible. If someone sees something wrong, they should be able to speak. He nodded. Do it. Draft the policy. Dorothy studied him. He was no longer the man who had grabbed her wrist in rage. There was a stillness in him now, a humility that hadn't been there before. And yet traces of the guarded Michael remained. Perhaps they always would. I know this wasn't easy for you, she said softly. He looked at her puzzled, letting someone else lead. Sharing power, he leaned back, considering it wasn't easy. But it was necessary. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't demand filling. I read the rest of your father's letters, she added. He believed in control because he never believed in people. And I followed in his footsteps longer than I care to admit, Michael said. But you broke that pattern. I didn't come here to change you. No, he said, but you reminded me I could. A week later, Dorothy attended her first charity gala as Michael's representative held at a grand hall in Helena. The event shimmered with crystal chandeliers and people dressed in sleek confidence. At first, eyes followed her, some with curiosity, others with subtle doubt. But as she delivered her speech about the scholarship fund and the future of the Harrison estate, the room quieted. She didn't speak about her past. She spoke about the power of opportunity, about the strength it took not just to climb, but to lift others as you rose. The applause was warm, steady, real. After the event, a woman approached her, mid-50s, sharp suit, silver curls. I don't know your whole story, the woman said, but it's clear you've earned your place. That takes grit. Dorothy nodded, smiling. Thank you. That means more than you know. Back at the estate that night, she removed her heels with relief, walking barefoot through the quiet halls. She paused at the entrance of the study where the fireplace still flickered. Michael sat with a legal pad reviewing notes. He looked up as she entered. How was the gala successful, she replied. You'll get a dozen thank you emails by morning. I'll forward them all to you. He teased. She laughed. Fair. As she turned to leave, he called her name. Dorothy. She stopped. There's something else. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a small envelope. She took it, opened it slowly. Inside was a deed. The Jessica Community Grant Foundation listed under both their names. Her throat tightened. You created this already. I've been thinking about legacy, Michael said, and how it's not just what we leave behind, but who we leave it with. She stared at the paper words swimming for a moment. This is real. It is, he said, and it's yours to shape. You earned that. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the paper. Thank you for believing in me. No, Michael said with a quiet certainty. Thank you for showing me how. That night, as Dorothy stepped into her quarters, she passed by the mirror. For the first time in a long while, the woman staring back at her didn't look like someone surviving. She looked like someone building someone, leading someone who had turned a trial into a turning point. And the story was just beginning. A few weeks passed, and the air at the Worthington estate felt gentler, like it had been exorcised of an old unspoken weight. Dorothy had slipped into her new role with grace and a quiet authority that inspired rather than commanded. Even the kitchen staff, once stiff and weary around her, now laughed freely in her presence. The house no longer held its breath when she walked by. But one afternoon, while reviewing some old estate records, Dorothy stumbled across a discrepancy. A check written 6 months prior to a now defunct account, signed by a lease but in Michael's name. It had gone unnoticed in the sea of transactions tied to charity events and property upkeep. Dorothy stared at the line item, her fingers frozen on the ledger. Something about it tugged at her like a loose thread in a tapestry. She brought it to Michael. He looked at the document, his brows furrowed. This check was issued under a medical assistance fund Elise oversaw, he muttered. It was supposed to help a veterans hospice in Billings. Except the account was shut down months before the payment, Dorothy said softly. This might not be the only one. Michael stood and crossed the room, staring out the window. How much do you think she took? Enough that you didn't notice right away. Enough to require an audit. He turned his voice low. Start it quietly. I want every record Elise handled reviewed. Dorothy nodded. I'll pull Jerome in to help. He knows the estate's logistics better than anyone. Over the next several days, Mia and Jerome combed through boxes of receipts, account statements, and internal memos. They worked late into the night, sometimes side by side at the dining table, other times in separate rooms, meeting every few hours to compare findings. What they uncovered was worse than either had imagined. Elise hadn't just misused estate funds. She had established a network of ghost accounts tied to shell charities, subtly draining money through small, frequent disbursements. The theft spanned 3 years, possibly longer, masked by legitimate-looking transactions and smoothed over by her trusted position. This wasn't opportunism, Jerome said one night, his voice bitter. This was architecture. She built this scheme like a second house under the roof of the first. Mia leaned back in her chair, exhaustion evident in her eyes. We need to go to the authorities. I agree, Michael said as he entered the room. He'd been reading the printed report they compiled. But we'll do it the right way, quietly, with legal counsel. No press, no leaks. Dorothy stood, and the staff, some of them, may have noticed, others may have been complicit. Michael nodded grimly. We'll question them one at a time discreetly. No accusations, just clarity. In the days that followed, Dorothy led those interviews with a firm but respectful hand. She asked questions not just to expose wrongdoing, but to understand how Elise had cultivated an atmosphere of silence. Most of the staff were innocent, unaware, intimidated, or simply distracted. A few had suspicions but lacked proof or courage. But one name kept coming up. Margot, a former bookkeeper who had left suddenly a year ago, citing family health issues. Dorothy tracked her down in a nearby town. Margot agreed to meet in a diner off the interstate. She was in her 60s now, gay-haired and sharpied. Her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her coffee. I knew something was wrong, she admitted. Elise told me to reroute a few checks. When I asked too many questions, she offered me a bonus. I refused. A week later, my hours were cut. Then I was accused of mishandling files. Why didn't you come forward? Dorothy asked gently. Margot gave a sad smile. Because I knew no one would believe me. Ely was the face of order. I was just a tired woman with arthritis and a quiet voice. You were more than that, Dorothy said, and you're going to help us prove it. By the end of the week, they had everything they needed. Documents, witness statements, even audio from an old voicemail Margot had saved. Elise warning her to stay quiet for the good of the family. Michael's lawyers filed the report with the district attorney. No press releases, no grand statements, just evidence stacked high and irrefutable. That Friday night, Michael invited the entire staff to the main hall. Not a formal dinner, but a gathering, a meeting between employer and employees, not built on fear, but transparency. Dorothy stood beside him as he addressed them. For years, he said, someone in this house betrayed not just my trust, but the spirit of this estate. Funds meant to heal and uplift were used for selfish gain. But the truth has come out not through surveillance or suspicion, but through courage. He turned to Dorothy. Because one woman refused to stay silent. Oh, there was silence then, a long, slow clap from Jerome, then the chef, then others. Not applause for a hero, but acknowledgement for someone who had done what many feared. Later that night, as the staff dispersed and quiet returned to the mansion, Dorothy lingered by the marble staircase. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished stone floor beneath her. She remembered Elise's cold stares, Michael's early accusations, the weight of every step she had taken to get here. And now those steps echoed differently, not with fear, but with purpose. By Monday morning, a quiet storm of change had taken root at the Worthington estate. The news of Elise's crimes hadn't spread to the press, just as Michael had intended. But within the house, it lingered like the scent of extinguished fireproof, that something had burned and something new had taken its place. Dorothy spent the early part of the day revisiting old protocols, budgeting flows, departmental oversight, and staff communication. Every thread Elise had tightened to control others. Dorothy now unwound carefully, not to unravel order, but to restore transparency. The estate needed healing, not just systems. Midway through the morning, she met with Miss Diet, the housekeeper in the sunroom. The older woman, always sharp with her posture, and words had been quieter lately. Miss DeWitt? Dorothy said, sliding a folder across the small table between them. This is the new accountability log. It's not a punishment, just a way to keep checks and balances clear. You'll have complete access. Dick glanced at it, then looked back at Dorothy. It's a good idea, but not something you had to explain to me. Dorothy smiled. Maybe not, but I believe in over-communicating when trust has been broken. Dweet nodded slowly, fingers folding over the folder. I didn't speak up. When Elise was pushing people out, changing policies, I saw it. I said nothing. You weren't the only one, Dorothy said gently. No, Did admitted, eyes distant. But I've worked this estate for 30 years, and it took someone from the outside to fix it. Mia's voice was quiet. Sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see what old ones learn to ignore. Later that afternoon, Dorothy found herself in the garden with Jerome again. He was checking the sprinkler heads, muttering about the drought forecast. Seems like half the soil's drying out faster than the ink on Worthington's lawyer letters, he grunted. Dorothy laughed, kneeling beside a patch of lavender. Funny how everything looks the same, but nothing feels the same. Jerome shrugged. Change sneaks up. Then one day you realize you're standing in a different world. She nodded, brushing dirt from her hands. Feels like that. As the sun dipped lower, she returned to the main house to review renovation plans for the guest wing. Michael had approved a modest redesign, one that would open space for staff meetings, training sessions, and community outreach projects tied to the foundation Dorothy now co-managed. As she reviewed blueprints, she was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Michael. I thought you'd want to see this, he said, handing her a letter. She took it and opened it slowly. It was from the district attorney's office. Charges had been filed. Elise was officially under investigation. The case would proceed quietly but thoroughly, thanks to the airtight file submitted by Michael's legal team and Margot's testimony. She'll face consequences, Michael said. Even if no one ever hears the full story, Dorothy folded the letter. Good, but it's not about punishment anymore. It's about closure. Michael studied her for a moment. And what does closure look like to you? She exhaled. It looks like this place being more than just walls and ledgers. It looks like dignity for every person who scrubs these floors or cooks in that kitchen. For the gardener, for the accountant, even for you, he nodded slowly. You've done more than expose fraud here, Dorothy. You've restored something I didn't even realize I'd lost. What's that, Faith? She didn't reply, but the weight of his words settled around them. That evening, Dorothy walked alone along the western path behind the estate where the gravel met the sloping fields. The sky stretched wide, strewy with orange and deep purple, the air cool against her skin. She thought of the first time she'd stood here, barely seen, barely heard, suspected, doubted, nearly broken. Now she stood with purpose, no longer surviving under scrutiny, but shaping something lasting. In her pocket was the list of the first 3 scholarship recipients for the Jessica Foundation. Young women from different towns, each with stories of struggle, each now offered a different future. She smiled to herself. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the part where the roots took hold, where the house on the hill no longer cast shadows, but light in Dorothy Martinez, once just the help, now. The heart of the estate walked back into that light, ready for what came next. By early spring, the trees surrounding the Worthington estate were blooming in soft pinks and greens, casting long shadows on the gravel paths. The wind had lost its bite, replaced with the kind of gentle warmth that made windows creak open and flowers lean toward sunlight. Dorothy stood by the balcony of the East Wing, sipping tea and scanning through a folder of pending scholarship applications. The foundation had received over 100 submissions in the past month, each one more compelling than the last. Stories of single mothers finishing law degrees at night, young women balancing jobs and education while supporting aging relatives. As Dorothy read their words, she saw reflections of her own past, the challenges she once thought would define her forever. She was pulled from her thoughts by the ring of the landline in her office. A voice she didn't recognize asked if she was Dorothy Martinez. Yes, she said cautiously. This is Karen Dwight, the woman continued. I'm Miss Dwight's daughter. She asked if it would be all right to bring a guest to the estate tomorrow, someone who used to work here. Mia paused. Of course the doors are always open to those who've served here with dignity. The next morning, Mia waited at the front entrance as a modest sedan pulled up. Miss Ditz stepped out first, then helped an elderly man from the passenger seat. He moved slowly using a cane, but his eyes were sharp beneath his weathered cap. "This is Mr. Samuel Bryant," Mr. Dietz said. "He was head butler here in the 1972nd. Left before you were born." Samuel extended a trembling hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Dorothy. I've heard about you from every hallway this place still remembers." Mia smiled warmly, shaking his hand. "The pleasure's mine. Please come in." They led him through the main hall, where sunlight spilled across polished floors. Samuel paused at nearly every room, recalling names, meals, evenings of grandeur and grief. As they reached the west corridor, he stopped before a painting. "I remember when this was hung," he said. "Your Mr. Worthington's father had it commissioned after a major acquisition. That was the night he raised all our wages. First time we felt like part of the family." Dorothy walked beside him, listening, absorbing not just stories, but the spirit of those who came before. The Worthington estate was not only built on money or inheritance, it was built on people like Samuel, like Miss Dwight, like the dozens of invisible hands who kept the house beating. Later that afternoon, they gathered in the garden where Michael had arranged tea and refreshments. The moment felt rare, almost ceremonial. Dorothy watched Michael greet Samuel with a quiet reverence. "I remember you," Michael said. "You carried me on your shoulders when I broke my arm as a boy." Samuel chuckled, "And you cried the whole way back to the guest house." They all laughed, the sound honest and light. After tea, Samuel turned to Dorothy. "You've done something powerful here," he said. "More than exposing a thief or running a house, you've restored its memory. You've honored the souls who gave this place meaning." Ma's throat tightened. "That's the greatest compliment I could receive." "Then let me offer one more," Samuel said. "You've made me proud to have once walked these halls." The visit ended with hugs, handshakes, and the promise of return. As the car pulled away, Dorothy stood beside Miss Ditt, both of them silent for a long while. "He used to say the house had a pulse," Mitt said softly, "and it was always strongest when the people in it were respected." Dorothy nodded. "Then we'll make sure it keeps beating strong." That evening, she returned to the study and placed a note in the archive, a record of the visit, Samuel's reflections, and a photograph they had taken in the garden. She wanted future generations to know not just the architecture of the estate, but its soul. Michael entered a few minutes later, holding a small envelope. "I just got this from the hospice in Billings," he said, handing it to her. "They've received the first grant through the foundation. They want to invite you to speak at their annual luncheon." Dorothy read the note, her hands steady. "I'd be honored." Michael nodded. "You're rewriting the legacy of this place, Dorothy, one step at a time." She looked at him, her voice calm. "We both are outside." The spring wind lifted the curtain slightly, and for the first time in decades, the house on the hill stood not as a symbol of power, but of purpose, rebuilt not in marble or money, but in truth, memory, and quiet transformation. The following week, Dorothy sat alone in her office with a letter addressed in looping handwriting that felt oddly familiar. It had arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, and had been hand-delivered to the gatehouse by a courier who didn't wait. She stared at it for a moment, sensing that whatever was inside wasn't just meant to inform, but to unsettle. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the first few lines. Her breath caught. It was from Elise. "Dorothy, I know you think you understand what happened. You've built your own story, heroine of the estate, savior of a blind old man's fortune. But I wonder, have you asked why no one questioned me for all those years? Do you think that kind of loyalty comes without merit? There's more to the Worthington estate than you know, and some truths don't surface until someone digs too deep. Consider this a courtesy, an invitation to pause before digging further." It wasn't a threat, not directly, but there was something sharp beneath the words, like glass hidden in velvet. Dorothy folded the letter and set it aside. Her fingers drummed against the desk as thoughts churned. Elise had known exactly how to manipulate appearances, how to turn suspicion into silence. What was she implying now? That others had been involved, that Michael had secrets she hadn't yet unearthed? She rose and crossed the room, retrieving the estate archives. There were still unopened files from the late 1992 music, when Michael's father passed and Michael took full control. It was a chaotic time. Even in the journals there were gaps. Dorothy started with a folder marked Transitional Accounts 1998. Inside were statements from an old bank that no longer existed, checks from dormant trusts, and one peculiar transfer. It stood out for its amount, $250,000, and its recipient, a woman named Claudia Wren. Dorothy's brow furrowed. The name rang no bell. She brought the file to Jerome later that day. He glanced at it, then did a double take. Claudia Wren, yeah, I remember that name. She worked here briefly. Quiet kind, left in a rush after the old man passed. Some folks whispered she was paid to disappear. Dorothy leaned forward. Disappear, from what Jerome shrugged. Nobody ever said outright, but the rumor was that she knew something about Mr. Worthington Sr.'s dealings. Money moved fast after his death. Staff were let go. Files disappeared. Dorothy felt the knot forming in her chest. Do you think Michael knew? Jerome hesitated. That's not for me to say, but if you go down this path, be ready for answers you can't unhear. That night, Dorothy met with Michael in the study. He was reviewing the second quarter projections for the foundation, but she didn't bother with pleasantries. Who was Claudia Wren? She asked, setting the file before him. He froze. She had seen Michael angry before. She had seen him ashamed, humbled, even open. But this was something else. He looked cornered. She was a housekeeper, he said finally, in the months before my father died. And why did she receive $250,000 from a dormant trust the day after his funeral? His eyes didn't flinch. Because my father assaulted her repeatedly. She came to me after his death. She didn't want a court battle or headlines. She just wanted to disappear. Dorothy felt the air thicken. You covered it up. I gave her peace. Michael said, his voice low. I couldn't erase what he did, but I could give her something she could use to build a life far away from this place. Dorothy paced slowly, and the rest of the staff, the others, who might have suffered or known. I don't know, he admitted. I was too consumed with the business, with distancing myself from his shadow. I thought one payment was closure. Maybe I was wrong. She turned to face him. This place can't heal if we keep finding bones buried beneath the marble. I know, he said. What do you want to do? She stared at the folder for a long moment. I want the foundation to fund an investigation. Not criminal. It's too late for that, but historical. I want every former employee contacted, interviewed, given a chance to speak if they choose. I want the truth recorded. Michael nodded. Done. And she added a public statement not about Claudia by name, but about a new chapter, one that honors every voice, not just the ones history chose to remember. He met her, Kaza. You lead it, I will, she said quietly. That night, Dorothy wrote her own letter, not to threaten or warn, but to invite healing. Dear Miss Wren, I hope this finds you well. I want you to know your silence is not invisible. What happened to you matters. It always did. And we are building something now that ensures it never happens again. Not in the shadows, but in full view. You are welcome here. On your terms always. She sealed the envelope with trembling fingers. Outside, the wind shifted again, warmer now, but heavier. Truth had its own weather, and Dorothy Martinez had decided to walk through every storm. By the time spring faded fully into summer, the Worthington estate had taken on a rhythm Dorothy could feel in her bones. There were still moments of tension, still quiet echoes of what had been buried beneath the polished floors, but each day brought something new: truth, transparency, accountability. The letter to Claudia Wren had gone unanswered for over 3 weeks. Dorothy had almost given up hope when one afternoon a small package arrived for her, postmarked from Santa Fe. Inside was a simple envelope with no note, just a USB drive and a slip of paper with the words, "For the record, do with it what you will." Dorothy plugged the drive into her computer. There were 2 video files. The first was a grainy handheld recording dated 17 years earlier. The image was shaky, showing a dimly lit corner of the old staff quarters. Claudia Wren, visibly younger, sat in a chair, eyes sunken, voice. I'm saying this because I don't know what tomorrow brings. He came into my room again, same as before. He smells like bourbon and smoke and always makes the same excuses. I told Elise. I begged her to help. She told me to keep quiet, said the family would handle it. They handled it all right, paid me off like I was a problem to be erased. Dorothy paused, the video heart pounding. The second video was more recent. Claudia looked older, but there was a new sharpness in her eyes. I've made peace with my past. I left that place behind for good reason, But if there's someone trying to make it better, really better, then this belongs with them. You want truth. Here it is. Use it wisely. Dorothy closed her laptop, gently sitting in silence for a long time. That night she requested a private meeting with Michael. He met her in the drawing room, which now felt less like a monument and more like a place where real conversations could happen. She sent this, Dorothy said, handing him the USB. You need to watch it alone. Michael took it without protest, his expression unreadable, his hands steady. The next morning he returned to Dorothy's office. His eyes were tired, his voice stripped of any veneer. I didn't know Elise covered it up, he said. I thought she was doing what Claudia asked. I was wrong. Dorothy nodded slowly. This place won't move forward if we keep hiding its shadows. I know, Michael replied. We'll go public not with names but with the truth. We'll release a full report on the Foundation's website. We'll establish a restorative justice program, counseling grants a plaque honoring former staff, including those we failed. And the staff, Dorothy asked. We bring them into the process, and he said, no more top-down commands. We heal this place together. That afternoon, Dorothy stood before the estate's employees, groundskeepers, cooks, cleaners, admin staff, all gathered in the courtyard beneath the old sycamore tree. There are things about this house, about its past, that were hidden for too long, she began. Some of those things were ugly, some painful, and some still cast shadows today. She looked across the faces, meeting their eyes one by one. But we are not defined by silence. We are defined by what we do next. Together, we're creating a record of what truly happened here. Not for shame, for justice. There was a stillness followed by a murmur of agreement. Then clapping, not loud, but firm, real. That evening, Michael stood beside Dorothy as they watched the bronze plaque being mounted in the main hallway. It read, in honor of those who served this estate in silence, may their stories never be forgotten. The letters gleamed under the soft light. More than just an inscription, they were a promise. Later that week, Dorothy was invited to speak at a community event hosted by a local historical society. The theme was legacy and transformation. She stood before a room of older adults, many with silver hair and folded hands, others with stern faces softened by time. I once believed legacies were built on money buildings and last names, Dorothy began. But I've learned they're also built on silence and on the courage to break it. She told them about Claudia not by name but in spirit, about the healing that only truth could bring about the estate that had once been a fortress of secrecy, now opening its windows to light. Afterward, an older man approached her. His handshake was firm, his voice growly. My mother worked for a family like the Worthingtons. She never spoke of it. Maybe now I understand why. Dorothy smiled, soft but steady. It's never too late to tell their story. As she returned to the estate that night, she passed the garden where new benches had been placed, one bearing Claudia's initials carved small but clear. For the first time in decades, the land didn't just whisper secrets, it told the truth, and it bloomed. The Worthington estate had never hosted a reunion before, not of its staff. In years past, only donors, dignitaries, and the upper crust of the city's elite had gathered in its grand hall. But this time, under Dorothy's guidance, the house would open its doors for a very different reason. It began as a simple idea. Invite back everyone who had once served the estate. Gardeners, maids, cooks, drivers, bookkeepers, anyone still living and willing to return. What started as a list of 15 quickly grew to over 40 names. Some still lived nearby. Others would be traveling across states. The event would be called The Gathering, a celebration, yes, but more than that. A reckoning with history and a restoration of dignity. Dorothy worked tirelessly with Jerome and Met to organize the details. The dining hall would be cleared of its usual fine china and white linens, replaced by long communal tables and warm lighting. There would be music, not the formal quartet of the old days, but a local jazz trio. Instead of a printed program, guests would receive a booklet titled Voices of the House, featuring stories, photos, and handwritten reflections gathered over the past few months. The night before the event, Dorothy stood alone in the hall, running her hand along the smooth surface of the table nearest the fireplace. So much had changed, and yet in the quiet of the room, she could still feel echoes of footsteps, of whispered conversations, of unspoken fears. Tomorrow those echoes would be acknowledged. The morning sun rose on a clear golden day. Staff moved briskly, placing framed photos along the walls. Images of the estate from the 1952nd, candid shots of the kitchen team in the 72nd, even a few grainy Polaroids of a young Michael riding on Samuel Bryan's shoulders. Guests began arriving just after noon. Some came with canes, others with children or grandchildren in tow. The air filled with greetings, laughter, and the kind of hugs that only time can deepen. Dorothy greeted each personally. For many, it was their first time returning since they'd left some under good terms, others less so. Claudia Wren was among the last to arrive. She stepped out of a taxi in a long navy dress, her silver hair pinned back, her eyes sharp behind thin-frame glasses. For a moment, she stood still, scanning the estate, as if measuring how it had changed and how it hadn't. Dorothy walked to her. "Miss Wren," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Thank you for coming." Claudia looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Didn't think I would, but this feels different." "It is," Dorothy replied. "Because of you." Inside, the event began with a meal. Dishes once served in the service quarters. Pot roast collarded greens, peach cobbler were now placed at the center of every table. Staff sat alongside former workers breaking bread, not as servants and supervisors, but as a shared family of memory. After the meal, Michael stepped forward. "I stand here as a man who inherited not just land or wealth, but also mistakes," he said, voice steady. "I can't undo the wrongs committed under this roof, but I can acknowledge them. And more importantly, I can commit to ensuring this house never again silences those who give it life." He turned to Dorothy. "And this woman, this fierce, brilliant woman, has shown us all what leadership rooted in truth looks like." There was applause, but it was not performative. It was earned. Dorothy took the microphone, her hands resting lightly on the podium. "This house has always told a story," she began. "But for too long, that story only had one voice. Today we write a new chapter together." She gestured toward the tables. "These are the voices of the house. You kept it running. You endured, often unseen. Today you are not just seen, you are honored." There were tears from people who thought their contributions had been forgotten, from those who never dared imagine they'd return here with dignity. Later, Dorothy and Claudia sat together on one of the benches in the garden. "Do you feel closure?" Dorothy asked gently. Claudia looked out toward the magnolia trees. "Not closure, but peace. That's more than most get." Claudia turned to her. "And what about you, Dorothy?" "What comes next?" Dorothy thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't know, but I think this house still has stories to tell, and I intend to make sure they're told right." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the last guest departed, the Worthington estate stood bathed in amber light, quiet, grounded whole. For the first time in generations, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt healed. A week after the gathering, the estate exhaled. The flurry of emotion, of reckoning, of reconciliation had left its mark, an invisible imprint pressed into the walls and walkways. But for Dorothy, there was no pause. Her work, like the quiet pulse of justice, continued. One Monday morning, a letter arrived addressed to her, bearing the seal of a national nonprofit, the American Historical Justice Institute. Dorothy had submitted an application months ago, proposing that the Worthington estate be documented as a site of silent labor legacy, a designation for locations that held untold stories of domestic, often black labor that had gone unrecognized for generations. She opened the envelope with cautious hope. "We are pleased to inform you," she whispered aloud. They'd accepted. Not only that they wanted to fund a full oral history project on site, interviews, exhibits, even a mobile archive. The Institute had partnered with the Smithsonian. This was bigger than the estate. It was national recognition, and with it, national responsibility. She walked straight to the main house and found Michael in the library reviewing garden maintenance budgets. They said, "Yes," she said simply, holding out the letter. He read it once, then looked up. "That's incredible. This changes everything," Dorothy added, "not just for the estate, but for every former worker whose story was never told." Michael nodded slowly. "You're going to need a team." "I already have one," she said with a grin. Within days, plans were set in motion. Dorothy met with the director of the historical project, a woman named Dr. Celeste Graham, who brought a calm authority with her every word. "You're doing something rare here, Miss Jessica," Dr. Graham said as they walked the estate. "You're building an archive not from documents, but from people's memories. That's fragile but powerful. Dorothy smiled. That's exactly what this place needs. Interviews began the next week. The old parlor was converted into a recording studio. Jerome was the first to volunteer. He spoke with gravel in his voice, but clarity in his heart. He described long summer days pushing lawnmowers in 100-degree heat, the kindness of Miss Ditt when she smuggled iced tea out to the staff, the chill that fell over the estate when Elise first arrived. Others followed, dishwashers from the 82nd drivers who remembered Michael as a boy, seamstresses who hemmed gowns for galas they never attended. Each voice added to the quilt of history Dorothy was stitching together, but not every memory was warm. One woman, Lorraine, who had worked as a cleaner for just 1 year, recounted a night when she was asked to serve drinks at a private poker game. The guests were drunk. One cornered her in the hallway. She was 17, I told Elise, Lorraine said into the microphone. She said, I was lucky he didn't ask for more. Mia sat with her after the recording, holding her hand in silence. Do you regret coming back? Dorothy asked softly. No, Lorraine said. Not anymore because someone finally wrote it down. The oral history project gained traction quickly. Local news outlets picked up the story, then national ones, NPR called. The Smithsonian scheduled a visit. Letters poured in from across the country, from children of former servants from social justice organizations, from elderly readers who'd grown up in similar houses watching their mothers scrub floors while wearing quiet dignity like armor. One day as Dorothy walked across the estate toward the carriage house, now repurposed as a community archive, she spotted Michael by the fountain. He was staring at the stone lions flanking the water. Lost in thought, she approached him. You all right? She asked. He glanced over, smiled faintly. Do you think my father would have allowed any of this? Dorothy considered. Number. But that's why it matters. He nodded. When I was a boy, I thought this house made us better than everyone else. Now I see. It just made us more blind. Blindness isn't permanent, Mia replied. Not if you choose to see. They walked back to the house together. That evening, Mia received a voicemail from Claudia. I saw the piece on PBS. Claudia said, You made space for the truth, Dorothy, and that space, however painful, it set me free. Dorothy played the message twice. The next morning, she visited the small bench in the garden again, the one bearing Claudia's initials. This time, she brought a candle. She placed it gently on the stone and lit it. Around her, the estate stirred with quiet motion workers planting, children visiting with their grandparents, volunteers from the local college setting up research stations. The house that had once watched in silence now hummed with voices. Dorothy looked toward the main doors. For a long time, this place had stood like a fortress. Now it stood like a beacon. And Dorothy Martinez, once wrongly accused, now stood not just as its manager, but its memory keeper, its witness, its transformation. GPTO. Chapter 16. Ghosts in the Ledger. The Worthington Estate's transformation into a public archive had drawn praise. But with attention came scrutiny. As Dorothy sorted through the remaining files in the cellar archives, old ledgers, expense reports, and staff rosters, she found a binder marked in faded ink. Special Accounts Discretionary, 1983-2001. It was odd. Tucked behind utility invoices and sealed with a leather strap. Inside were transactions paid to non-escrow vendors, large cash withdrawals, and handwritten notes in a slanted cursive Dorothy didn't recognize. She took it upstairs and laid the pages out carefully under a reading lamp. One name surfaced more than once. D. Hargrove. She turned to Jerome the next morning. Do you know a D. Hargrove? Jerome leaned back in his chair, frowning. I haven't heard that name in years. Darren Hargrove. He was a driver. Quiet. Too quiet if you ask me. Left abruptly sometime in the early 92nd. Ma pointed to the ledger. These entries show he was receiving weekly payments long after he was supposedly gone. Jerome studied the pages. That's not just hush money, that's control. Later that day, Dorothy brought the information to Michael. His face darkened as he flipped through the records. I had no idea about any of this, he said. These payments, this handwriting, that's my mother's Elise. Dorothy felt a chill. What was she paying him for? I don't know, but if it was under discretionary, it wasn't approved by my father. This was her side game. Over the next few days, Dorothy and Michael dug deeper. They traced the hair of payments through a shell company linked to a private security firm in Atlanta. It appeared Elise had been using Harrove to do more than drive. He'd been tasked with surveillance, and in some cases intimidation, former employees, disgruntled suppliers, even a journalist who once inquired too closely about the estate's labor practices. They sat in silence as the weight of the discovery settled in. Elise didn't just maintain order, Michael said. She enforced fear. Dorothy nodded grimly, and she left a trail. They debated what to do. Dorothy wanted to include the findings in the historical archive. Michael hesitated. If we release this, we tarnish the name further, he said. Or Dorothy countered, we clean it for good. That night, Dorothy prepared a draft, a formal appendix to be added to the existing historical record. It included a timeline of Elise Harrison's unauthorized financial dealings, the nature of the hush payments, and sworn statements from 2 former staffers who remembered being harassed by a man matching Hargrove's description. Before submitting it, Dorothy reached out to Harrove himself. It took days of phone calls, but she finally reached a disconnected voice that answered from a trailer park in Missouri. I got nothing to say to you people, he growled. I'm not calling to accuse you, Dorothy said evenly. I'm calling to ask if you regret it. Silence. Then I did what I was told. I believe you, Mia replied. But truth has a way of catching up, and this time it's not out for blood. It's out for light, he hung up. That weekend, Mia released the report. It shook the local press. Elise's legacy, already fractured, cracked further. A few conservative outlets accused Mia of tarnishing history, but others, more grounded, praised her for unwavering honesty. Michael released a statement too. My mother, Elise Harrison, was a woman of order and ambition. She maintained control through any means necessary, and for that I apologize to those who suffered under her silence. The community responded with surprising grace. Instead of backlash, Dorothy received letters of gratitude from former staff members who now felt emboldened to speak. A local playwright even requested permission to adapt the story into a stage piece exploring generational trauma in Southern estates. Mia sat one evening in the garden, now lush with summer bloom. Claudia joined her on the bench without a word. You uncovered more than you expected, Claudia said. I always do, Maya replied. Claudia nodded. That's because truth isn't buried deep. It's just ignored. They sat together. 2 women shaped by silence but unafraid to speak. You ever think about leaving? Claudia asked. Sometimes, Dorothy admitted. But I also think about who would take my place and whether they'd care enough to keep listening. Claudia smiled faintly. Then you're exactly where you're needed. Later that night, Dorothy wandered back through the house, her footsteps soft against polished wood. The walls seemed lighter now, the rooms less watchful. She passed the main hallway and paused before the bronze plaque. With a fingertip, she traced the names engraved Samuel, Lorraine, Claudia, and beneath those a line she had added quietly. Truth begins where silence ends. And in that stillness, Dorothy knew the house no longer belonged to its past. It belonged to its voices. The Worthington estate was alive with purpose, its walls finally echoing with voices that had once been silenced. But even progress, when built upon a legacy of secrets, cast long shadows. It was a warm afternoon in late August when the letter arrived. Unlike most mail, it came not by post, but hand-delivered by a woman in a gray suit who offered no explanation. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting precise, formal. It read simply, Miss Jessica, we have unfinished business. E. War Harrison. Dorothy stared at the signature for a long time. Elise, after all these months, after the revelations, the apologies, the restructuring, Elise Worthington had remained a ghost, silent and unreachable until now. She showed the letter to Michael that evening. He looked at it like a wound reopened. She's back in the country, he asked. Apparently, Dorothy replied, and she wants to meet. He leaned against his desk, rubbing his jaw. You don't owe her anything. Dorothy didn't speak right away. She watched the light stretch across the office floor, the shadows long and golden. No, she said, but the house does. They arranged the meeting for 3 days later. It was to take place in the East Parlor, the room Elise once held private readings in, where no staff were ever allowed. This time Dorothy chose the space deliberately. The morning arrived heavy with humidity. Elise entered without fanfare. Dressed in a dark linen coat and matching gloves, her silver hair pulled back in its familiar shiny. Time had softened her jaw, but not her presence. She carried herself like a statue of dignified, deliberate, detached. "Dorothy," she said with cool acknowledgement. "Elise," Dorothy replied, motioning to the chair across from her. Elise sat crossing one leg over the other. Her eyes surveyed the room, pausing momentarily on a photograph of Claudia Wren that hung on the wall behind Mia's desk. "So it's true," Elise said. "You turned the house into a museum of grievances?" Dorothy's jaw clenched. "I turned it into a place of memory of reckoning." "I always knew you were ambitious," Elise murmured. "But I didn't expect sentimentality. It's not sentiment, it's justice." Elise smiled thinly. "Justice," she repeated as if testing the word for taste. "You've paraded private matters into the public square." "Accusations, finances, my name, your choices," Dorothy corrected. "And they were never private to the people you silenced." For a moment, Elise said nothing. Then she leaned forward slightly. "You've cost me everything," she said quietly. "Board seats influence my name." "No," Mia said calmly. "You cost yourself those things. I just uncovered the receipts." A tense silence fell between them. Then Elise said something Dorothy hadn't expected. "I want to donate." Dorothy blinked. "Excuse me." "To the archive. The restoration. All of it." "Why? Because this place was my life too?" Elise said, her voice thin. "And while I don't agree with your methods, I see where the tide is turning. If I can contribute, if I can still have a say, I want to." Mia folded her hands in her lap. "Control isn't the same as atonement," she said. "You don't get to rewrite the narrative just because you're funding the pen." Elisa's eyes flashed. "I'm not asking for a seat at the table. I'm offering to set one." Dorothy studied her. There was something real beneath the layers of pride and habit. Regret or simply self-preservation dressed as charity. She took a breath. "If you donate, you will have no say in content operations or oversight. Your name will not appear on any plaque. The funds will be allocated transparently." "Is that clear?" Elise nodded once. "Then we'll accept," Dorothy said. The older woman stood slowly adjusting her gloves. "You've grown into something formidable," she said. "I had no choice," Mia replied. "You taught me that." As Elise walked out of the parlor, her heels clicking softly against the wood, Dorothy felt the strange finality of the moment. Not a conclusion, but a closure. Elise hadn't come to destroy what Mia built. She'd come to surrender to it on her own terms, of course, but surrender nonetheless. That evening, Michael joined Mia on the balcony overlooking the grounds. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange. "She really offered to help?" he asked, half amused. "She did," Dorothy confirmed with caveats which I ignored. He smiled. "You're better at this than I ever was." "No," she said. "I'm just not afraid to look at the past without blinking." Below them, the lights flicked on across the property. In the distance, voices from a community tour drifted up the hill. The Worthington estate, once a monument to silence, now brimmed with life and light. Michael reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A copy of the deed transfer. The estate is officially under the Worthington Foundation. You have full executive rights." Dorothy opened it with trembling fingers. "I'm not the Worthington," she whispered. "No," Michael said. "You're what Worthington should have been." She looked out at the vast green, the trees swaying gently in twilight. "Then let's finish what we started," she said, and the wind answered, rustling through the leaves like applause. A year had passed since Dorothy first stepped into the Worthington estate under suspicion, her wrist aching from where she'd been yanked, her spirit bruised but unbroken. Now she stood in the heart of that same estate, surrounded by rows of folding chairs. Community members, former staff, and local leaders each face a testament to how far the house had come. It was the official opening of the Worthington Oral History Museum. The transformation was complete. What had once been a house built on wealth and silence was now a space of truth, memory, and belonging. Dorothy walked alone through the halls before the ceremony began. Running her fingers along the smooth edge of the exhibit, signs, the photos lining the walls were carefully chosen. Claudia Wren as a young woman holding a tray of tea, Samuel Bryant fixing the old fountain. Lorraine smiling as she danced in the staff Christmas party of 1985. Each image now had a name, a story, a place. There was one room, small sunlit, that Dorothy had insisted be added. Inside were no artifacts, no placards, just a circle of chairs and a sign on the door. Reflection room for listening. Visitors would be encouraged to sit, speak, or simply be still. The silence there was intentional. It wasn't the enforced hush of fear. It was the soft space where healing begins. Outside, the event was already buzzing. Michael, dressed in a simple gray suit, greeted guests with quiet humility. Dr. Celeste Graham stood near the ribbon, ready with her remarks. Dorothy stepped out into the afternoon light, the applause beginning as soon as the crowd saw her. She took the podium with grace, her voice carrying across the garden. This house has always had stories, she began, but for a long time they were whispered behind closed doors. Today we open those doors. We honor those who gave this place its heartbeat, not by erasing the past, but by facing it. She looked out at the audience. Claudia sat in the front row, cane across her lap, her eyes glassy with emotion. Jerome stood in the back, arms crossed, chin high. Miss DeWitt retired now, nodded gently with every word Mia spoke. Mia continued, some truths were painful, some were buried deep, but we still believe that justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's just a name remembered, a story told, a chair pulled up for someone who is always left standing. The ribbon was cut and the doors opened. Guests flooded in, moved by the exhibits, many wiping away tears. Older women pressed their hands to photos of friends, lost, whispering prayers or memories. Young people stood wide-eyed, realizing the history they'd never been taught was living right here in their hometown. In a corner of the archive room, a teenage boy read aloud a letter Dorothy had included in the exhibit, a letter she had written to herself the day after being accused of theft. I am not what they think I am. I am more than this pain. One day I'll prove it, not with anger, but with truth. He turned to his mother beside him and said, she wrote this before anything changed. The woman nodded. That's how change begins. As the day wore on and the sun dipped behind the oaks, Dorothy found herself alone once more in the reflection room. She sat, letting the silence settle around her like a gentle blanket. Her eyes closed. The door creaked open. Footsteps entered, slow, deliberate. Dorothy. She turned. Elise stood in the doorway. No gloves, no armor, just a woman, older now, smaller somehow. I didn't think you'd come, Dorothy said. I didn't think I could, Elise replied. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. This place, Elise began, then stopped. It's beautiful but hard to walk through. It's supposed to be, Ma said. Truth is never soft at first. Elise looked down at her hands. I was wrong about a lot. I know, Dorothy said. They sat in the quiet, not as enemies, not quite as friends, just as two women tied to the same soil by different legacies. I thought if I controlled everything Elise said, I could protect what mattered. And who decided what mattered? Mia asked, not unkindly. Elise didn't answer. When she rose to leave, she touched Mia's shoulder lightly. Thank you for giving this house a better ending than I ever did. Oh? Mia watched her go, her heart not softened, but steadied. Later that evening, as the guests trickled out and lanterns were lit along the pathways, Mia stood once again before the bronze plaque in the hallway. She ran her fingers over the newest engraving. This house belongs to its people, past, present, and those still to come. She stepped outside into the warm night air, the estate glowing behind her. A little girl in braids ran past, laughing, a toy recorder in her hand. I'm interviewing everybody, she shouted. Dorothy chuckled. Start with the gardeners, she called after her. They know the best stories. And just like that, the house was no longer haunted by what had been hidden. It was filled with the